At the time this happened, I didn't really know what was going on. I just had the impression that the woods outside of my house were very creepy. I only recently decided that I think it was a Bigfoot, after doing a lot of research and seeing a lot of similarities between my own story and other people's stories who have had encounters. My family started building a house in rural South Georgia when I was 12, and we moved in once it was finished a few months after I turned 13. It was a few miles outside of the town we lived in, a plantation town on the Florida-Georgia border. We lived there until I graduated from high school in 2013. The first thing I don't actually remember happening, but my dad told me about it a few months ago. Apparently the first night my family slept in the new house, when none of the windows had curtains or blinds yet, I came into my parents' bedroom and asked to sleep with them. I did this a lot as a little kid, but it was pretty unusual by the time I was 13. My dad said that I told him I saw a face looking into my window, and that it scared me. The rest of all of this I remember pretty clearly. One time, my sister and I were jumping on a trampoline in our backyard, and all of a sudden we heard something whistle at us. It came from the side of the house, near our garage. I can't explain exactly why it was so terrifying, but it scared us to death. We jumped off the trampoline and sprinted inside, slamming the door behind us. It was just so weird, because we had already met the neighbors at that point, and we didn't have many. And it didn't make sense that they would hide from us and whistle. They would have just walked up to us. Plus, we hadn't seen any people approaching. My sister has told me that she saw something hiding behind the trash can next to the house, but I didn't see that. She doesn't remember the whistling part, but I swear I'll never forget it. It was just so bizarre. I think that she might have seen something and remembered what she saw, while I only remembered what I heard. Sometimes I think that I remember seeing a dog or something run to the side of the house from the woods like super fast, but I don't know for sure if that actually happened. Anyway, that was one of the single freakiest things that has ever happened to me. I know it sounds mundane, but in the moment it was bone-chilling, and I still get chills thinking about it. Anyway, after that my dad decided to build a privacy fence around our backyard, and we got 2 dogs a little bit after that. The yard was pretty big, and my sister and I were both pretty athletic. We would put on headphones and play in the yard while we listened to music, kick a soccer ball, run laps around the yard, play fetch with the dogs, things like that. Sometimes we did this with each other, and sometimes by ourselves. At night, I always thought I would see some sort of cone-shaped head looking at me over the fence. But if I did a double take to make sure that I wasn't seeing things, the head would be gone. Other times, I'd be out in the yard by myself, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I would feel like I was being watched. This was always scarier to me than when I thought I saw things. I swear it was like I knew that something was watching me, and it was overwhelming. I would stop what I was doing immediately, and go inside. This happened all the time. Other times I'd be shooting basketball in our driveway, or going for a jog through the neighborhood. It was a developing subdivision, not a house out in the woods by itself, and I would get that same freaky feeling. After we got our licenses, I think I actually saw one while I was driving. We were with another friend who also lived outside the city limits, on the way to her house. Our friend was in the front seat, and my sister was in the back seat. We were coming around this bend not too far away from our neighborhood, and all of a sudden my friend and I saw this super tall brown thing on the side of the road. It was very tall, ancient. It looked like a really old man with a long beard and a distorted face. It was slender too, not bulky. My friend and I saw it at the same time, and both said, "What was that?" I guess my sister was on her phone or something, because I remember that she asked us what we saw, but we'd already passed it by the time she looked out her window. My friend and I both agreed that it was a man in a mask trying to scare people, but I don't think either of us believed that. From then on out, every time I drove past that spot, I would try to see if there were any weird trees or something that we maybe could have thought was a person with a mask, but it just looked like a regular patch of woods. Another time, a different friend was playing with us outside as the sun was setting. We were walking down this empty road that no houses had been built on yet, and to our left was some woods with miles and miles of ATV trails. All of a sudden, he just goes, "Run." We didn't ask questions. We all sprinted back to the house. When we got back, he was shaken up, and he said that he saw something, but he never did tell us what it was. My sister and I are both grown now, and our parents sold the house and moved out of state when we were in college, so we haven't been back for years. But after I did some research and started putting some pieces together, I asked my sister if she thought the house we grew up in was creepy, and she said it absolutely was. She would feel like she was being watched in the yard too, and remembers seeing shadows moving in the woods. She said she'll never forget seeing something hiding behind the trash can that one time. She even independently Googled Bigfoot sightings in the town we grew up in, and found an article about a rash of sightings that happened while we were in middle school. Anyway, we both believe that that's why we were so creeped out by the woods outside of our house. That there was probably a Bigfoot, maybe more than one, living out there. I never connected all of these weird things until I started listening to Bigfoot podcasts and stuff like that. But now that I've put the pieces together, I feel like I can't unsee it. After she had surgery for kidney stones, my grandma became more sensitive about things. Exactly after the surgery, while she was still in the hospital, we both met in our dreams. She's seen me in her dream, and I've seen her in my similar dream on the same night. There's a lot to say about that too, but that's a story for another day. About a half a year later, she kept mentioning the little ugly people coming out of this particular flower pot in her apartment. According to her, they would come out during the nighttime or very early in the morning, just rising from the flower pot, walking a little bit around the room, and then going back into the flower pot and decreasing in size until the flower pot would swallow them. Bear in mind, this happened around 10 years ago. She told the entire family, and even though my mom and I are believers of the paranormal, we thought it might be age that was speaking in this case. Maybe she was hallucinating. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. But no, she kept insisting and insisting that she sees them every night. Then she kept giving us details. We suggested she might be dreaming, and she would respond that she would get up and turn on the lights every time. They seemed to wake her up almost every night. On some nights, she would go to my grandpa in his bedroom. They were sleeping separately because they enjoyed the solitude and comfort, and she would wake him up and say, "They're back." By the time my grandpa would come into her room, nothing was there. One night she called my mom to say that they'd woken her up again. She gave us a lot of details about these creatures, that they were small but quite ugly. That's why she named them the little ugly people. They were maximum 1 meter in height. They were weirdly dressed. Later on, she described them better, and I came to the conclusion that the fashion style would be around the 1800s. They also had hats. They were both male and female, and it was only one of them coming out per night, never more of them, even though I do refer to them as plural. It seemed that they were struggling a bit to get out of the flower pot, and, by implication, the flower, which was just a normal apartment plant. She tried to communicate with them every time, but with no success. They never hurt her, and they weren't doing anything to the objects in the room. They walked around the room, sometimes going to a different flower pot, and disappearing there. There were times when she lost it and started screaming at them, and telling them to leave her alone. One time she said she woke up and looked around and there was a tiny creature staring at her. Most of the time, they were staring at her. Also, some of them had beards. We've searched for a very long time for any kind of reasonable explanation. Then we started to believe her, and we searched for a paranormal one. I posted on a paranormal forum many, many years ago, and the answer I received was that they were gnomes visiting my grandma, and that she should not interact with them, as they might get aggressive and dangerous. They suggested putting rocks in a circle around the flower pot, and we did. I don't recall any other suggestion. This went on for more than a year. After about 6 months of quiet after we put the stones out, she started to forget things. Soon after, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which she bravely battled for another 2 to 3 years. She's no longer with us, and I miss her, but sometimes I still meet her in my dreams. We started to think that maybe, since she ultimately was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, she was hallucinating. But that doesn't explain why after we put the stones out, it stopped happening. Unless it was power of suggestion. Whether it was something medical or paranormal, it was still a really bizarre thing. And I'll never forget it. This happened when I was about 7 years old, to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I wanted to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farm and ranch land that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. Needless to say, it made us pretty tough, and it takes a lot to spook us. We're all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, becoming a senior NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the U.S. Navy. He was 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. He was home on leave and went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming in the house, shaking and crying, saying that he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails and would tear someone to shreds before he let them make him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying that he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather and he rounded up the rest of the guys. The hunting squad went out, which was my dad, a few male cousins, my uncle, who was still terrified but didn't want to be labeled a chicken, and a couple of other guys. They all got their shotguns and ammunition and saddled the horses to go clear the woods. Apparently, they were aware of the dog man, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me to stay inside, and said that for absolutely no reason was I to step outside of our house until they returned. I had never heard my dad or grandfather so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes, and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point, because they've never stayed in the woods after dark. Shortly, I heard the sound of the horses running to the barn, and their voices. I was so relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably not to spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law that I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was pretty upset by this and felt that my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and grandfather taught me how to shoot. That's when I knew it was serious. I overheard the adults talking the next night. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had his sighting, bigger than any wolf could make, but definitely not dog tracks. As I said before, we're all avid outdoorsmen, and we can definitely identify tracks. My family has identified the tracks of just about every animal in that area, and some outside of it. But these couldn't be identified. About 8 feet up in a tree were claw marks. No Michigan bear could make those. We also found claw marks of about the same height on multiple trees throughout the property. They were cattle, mutilated, and not in any way that a coyote or bear would, and it lasted the whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, all of them mutilated, all with the same wolf dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows, he did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before unfortunately finally taking his own life. After that experience, though, he was never the same. He never touched alcohol before this, but after this I never saw him without a bottle of Jack in his hand, and his eyes were always haunted. He changed his personality. He never even went out in the woods again. He quit hunting, and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come home for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe that he saw something out there, and while he might have gotten away that day, it ultimately killed him. I had a rather odd encounter with some humanoid creature, or even a spirit possibly, just a few nights ago. I haven't been able to come up with a rational answer as to just what I saw. It happened just a few nights ago. I was biking home from work. I work the closing shifts for my local Walgreens, so I get off work around 10:30. I live only a half hour away by bike from my job, but most of the way home is by a heavily forested trail, which doesn't have very many street lights. It's always pitch black when I'm on my way home. I'm about 5 minutes into this bike ride, and I hit the beginning of where the street lights end and the darkness begins. As I always do, I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight option so I could see. Only a few seconds after I had turned it on, I tilted it up more and froze. I saw this tall, skinny, pale-looking figure for just a brief second, before it fell onto all fours and, just like the wind, was gone into the woods. Shortly after, I started to pedal as fast as I could, because I had no clue what I had seen, and I didn't want to be in the same woods as it was. That's when I heard a low screech. Whatever it was keeping pace with me, hidden in the woods out of sight. I managed to get out of that area very quickly, and I didn't see or hear anything after I left that heavily wooded area. But a while later on, I caught scent of what literally smelled like fresh blueberry pancakes or waffles. It was like somebody was standing out in the field with a hot plate of just the pan of blueberry pancakes, which didn't make any sense to me. There are no buildings or shops in the area where that scent came from. I figured that perhaps whatever it was I had seen was using the scent to try to draw me back into the woods. Now, I do know a few areas around that trail are supposedly haunted. There's a dinner theater that's not too far from it, and a supposedly haunted water tower in the area as well, and a few other places. But still, no matter what I can think of, I can't rationalize it or debunk it as something else. It couldn't have been a deer, because I've talked to people around the area, and no one has seen a deer in the area ever. Besides, it was standing on 2 feet when I first saw it, like a human. It couldn't have been any other wildlife, because the only wildlife I've ever spotted there are squirrels and birds. But I figured I would share my experience and see if anybody else has had something similar happen, or see if anybody knows what it is I saw. One of the more curious paranormal incidents in Georgia is the Georgia werewolf, Emily Isabella Burt. Apparently, Miss Burt was a resident of Talbot County, a rural county in southwest Georgia, between Macon and Columbus. The Burt family, a wealthy and prominent family in the Talbot County community, had several children. Of all of her children, it appears that Emily Isabella was the one with the most problems. For one, she had inherited a lot of physical traits from her father, including dark hair and bushy eyebrows. However, She was said to have had sharp, white canine teeth that made her smile quite disturbing. In one report, Roberts claims that Emily Isabella's mother took her to a local dentist to see if the teeth could be altered in any way, but he could do nothing for her. Soon afterward, she felt ill and suffered from restless nights. Emily is said to have strangely wandered the country during her restless nights. Legend has it that the beau of one of Emily Isabella's sisters, a William Gorman, reported to the Burts that something was killing his sheep. Fearful that this may soon be happening to her animals, Mrs. Mildred Burt became quite concerned. On ensuing visits, Gorman would recount stories about more sheep killings, and that some of his cattle were killed as well. He was concerned about the killings and decided to take action. He reported that he was going to be putting together what amounted to a posse. Their intentions were to shoot and kill whatever beast was doing the damage. Emily Isabella was unusually interested in what was going on, and what events had transgressed in the hunt for this animal. On the night of the big hunt, Mildred Burt, who had also inherited more than a few guns and was a great markswoman, went out with her pistol. She apparently suspected that Emily Isabella was somehow involved with the killings, and she wanted to be prepared for anything. As she was near the area, an animal lunged for her, and she fired. It ran away. Interestingly enough, the next morning it was reported that Emily Isabella had a bullet hole in her left hand. After being taken to a local physician, her mother decided to send her to Paris to be treated by a doctor who specialized in lycanthropy, a disorder that makes its victims think that they're werewolves. While she was in Paris, the attacks at home stopped, and once she returned, supposedly cured, the attacks fell to a minimum. Emily died in 1911 and is buried in a small cemetery out in the wilderness of Georgia. To this day, a number of paranormal incidents are reported in that area, with the grave itself generally believed to be haunted by the ghost of the werewolf. People report a strange stillness or a sense of unease around the cemetery, and the grave itself is strangely well kept, even though the cemetery is overgrown and forgotten. Others have reported that when small tokens, like a chip of stone, are taken from the cemetery, bad things happen to those people not long afterward. There are even some people who note that even just speaking poorly of Emily or her family causes the same problems to happen, as if the werewolf does not want anybody to speak ill of her. Today is February 11th of 2020, and I have just had an encounter less than an hour ago. So I'm hanging with my friend. We're going up on top of a mountain just to go up there. We had no real reason to go up there, we just wanted to. So we get up there and turn the car off. It's completely dead silent. It's really foggy from all the rain we've been getting, and it just seems to put me and my friend on edge. So we're sitting there with our windows cracked because we were vaping, and all of a sudden we hear something in the woods off to our left. He turns down the music and we both listen. We can see and hear the bushes rustling. First it would be in one spot, and then 10 seconds later it would be in another. My friend opens the door and I grab his wrist and pull him back into the car. I ask him if he's crazy, and he tells me no. He's just curious. I tell him that being curious is what gets people killed in horror movies, and I'll be damned if I let you die with me present. He looks at me, disappointed, and then gets back in the car and closes the door. We continue to sit there and listen. We hear the same stuff for about 2 minutes, and then it suddenly stops. We both look around and he starts hitting my shoulder with a sense of panic. I go, "What do you want?" He points to a gravel driveway that leads up to the power lines we were parked under. At the top of the hill, We both see a tall figure standing there, staring us down. I could see the faint red glow in its eyes. I could see my friend's chest rising and falling in the faint light that our phones were emitting. I felt fine, but I could definitely tell that my friend was not. It wasn't until the figure starts walking toward us with an alarming speed that I scream at my friend to snap out of it. He starts the car and hauls ass down the mountain. When we got off the mountain, we both looked at each other, asking each other non-verbally what the heck we just saw. I knew what I saw. I know it was Bigfoot. My friend wasn't so sure. He's not a believer. But after tonight, I feel like our believer community has grown by one. A couple of years ago, my boyfriend and I were in the woods near a dam. It was about 3 a.m., and we were just pulling an adventurous all-nighter and enjoying each other's company. The area is located in the South Shore of Massachusetts. As I've said, there's a dam with a stone wall and an area with picnic tables nearby. There's a path that goes into the woods. Lots of people fish here, and it seems like a pretty benign place. I've been here many times during the day, but never at night. We made our way to the path and went into the woods. We found a stone bench and were there for quite a while, when suddenly we heard what sounded like a large grunt or exhale. We stayed silent for a moment and waited until we heard it again, grunting and exhaling repeatedly. My boyfriend said, "Whatever it is has big lungs." We could hear it moving, not toward us, but almost as if it were passing us to the left, then to the right. It sounded close enough to get to us, but it never showed itself. We didn't run out, but proceeded at a regular pace down the path that would bring us out. The noises continued as we left and sounded farther and farther away, so it didn't follow us. There are certainly bears in Massachusetts, but not in this area. I even went on Google Maps to see if there was a farm nearby or something, but there wasn't. I cannot understand what this was, but whatever it was, sounded beastly. We're from a small town in southern Ohio, about an hour east of Cincinnati. This town has been plagued with people dying young, and some in pretty gruesome ways. Google Cheryl Fossil as an example. Many believe that this is caused by activity around the area, or that it's the cause of the activity. There's a section of woods that seems to have concentrated activity though. The woods in question are surrounded by 2 churches, a hospital, and an area of housing. Now, as full disclosure, things don't happen every time we go in. But when things do happen, they happen off the charts. The most common things that we've experienced are what we've dubbed the geeks. We call these things geeks because they're tall, sometimes 12 feet from toe to crown, and gangly. They move awkwardly, although they move between trees swiftly. They never present themselves outwardly, only glimpses of them as they move between trees. The scariest thing about them, however, is the sound right before they start moving. It's almost like a deep groan. The second that I want to talk about is Hydra. Only one of us have ever seen this thing, and so far has been the only one witnessed. It's like a small primate creature, with the face of a hideous woman, the body of a chimpanzee, and long greasy black hair with boils on its back, blood red boils. The member of our group who had encountered this thing refused to tell us what Hydra spoke to him about. These are some of the things that we've encountered. We're working on a documentary about what's going on in this area and the town itself. I'll keep everybody who's interested updated, but I really hope that somebody else has had similar experiences. We would love to find out what's going on in the woods.